Hello, everyone. I'm Jesse Zdonik with Dynaway. I'm the host of Dynaway Dialogues. We're glad you're joining us, and we're happy to welcome today Michael Mason. Mike has many years of experience, over 30 years of experience in maintenance reliability. He is the Director of Maintenance Reliability Services at ERP Automated, and we're thrilled to have him here today. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Jesse. Happy to be here.
Just jump right into it. I'd love to know a little bit about your background and how you got into the field, and kind of where the milestones lay in your career path.
Sure. So I graduated from Villanova University with a mechanical engineering degree. That was back in '92. So I've been out in the professional world for quite a bit of time now. My first few jobs were really more around design, a lot of heavy AutoCAD, things like that. Got into some manufacturing, more from a vendor standpoint, but then that's kind of where my career evolved from that point. So went from designing for small parts in a distribution type of facility, went to manufacturing, manufactured some textile type materials like a Teflon skin that was used for filtration, and that evolved into a bunch of other careers. So I think my real transition into heavy industrial was at a steel manufacturer. So we were at a rolling mill.
Wow.
And that's really where I really fell in love with a lot of that heavy industry, that, the more complicated processes. So that's my first true reliability job. So I had been in manufacturing prior to that. That was my first time in like a reliability engineering type position. It was also my first opportunity to implement a CMMS system from scratch. So this was back in the mid-late 90s, trying to implement a computerized system for steel workers that the junior guy had been there for about 20 years. They really, that was like the stereotype of the maintenance guys that didn't want to touch a keyboard. They wanted to handle the torch and the welder. So that was very interesting. The very big contrast from some of the implementation I've done more recently. A lot of the maintenance guys that are in the system now, a lot of the technicians have grown up using a lot of the electronic devices. So the phones, the handhelds, the computers, and all that. So you see an evolution both with the users of the system, but also with the software itself. I think that transition to catering to people who don't want to touch a computer versus catering to people who have grown up on an iPhone and things like that. So the interfaces have definitely evolved over time.
Tell me about that mid-90s implementation. What was the biggest thing you learned there with your first CMMS install?
I've been involved with 3 or 4 implementations at the end user facility, and every single time it's some common things that I see that the integrator messes up. So every software company comes in and tries to tell the manufacturing company how to do their business. They say our software does this, these are the steps you follow, and you do this. So it's tough for the software people to come in and tell you how to do your job. So the thing that we like to stress now is like the software is a tool. There are some very good tools out there. There are some very good capabilities. So I think when the software people come in and talk about the capability of the tool as opposed to this is how your process should work, it goes a lot better. So that was a big early thing is they came in and said, you're going to do things this way. And I said, well, that's not how I'm staffed. I have, 3 shifts. I've got 4 distinctly different trades that are doing different things. I said, your process that you're laying out is not how we do business. So quickly figuring out, how to pivot, still leverage the tools, still use the different bells and whistles that are out there. But you definitely have to leverage it to, adapting to your process as opposed to making the tool define your process.
From the reverse side for a software company, because I've always worked for software companies, but I have an engineering background. So what's really hard is that we have developers that don't really understand the manufacturing floor. And they often want to create software that works for companies like that, but they just they don't have the expertise. They've never had to turn a wrench for a year and figure out what the pitfalls
Mhm.
are, and so that's the I guess the black hole they fall into sometimes. So
I was going to say the again, the steel mill was a little bit different too because of the just the age of the group. I mean, most of these guys, like I said,
mhm,
they're been in it for 20, 30 years, started when they were, teenagers, 20. So you got these 40, 50-year-old guys that, were born in, 1950, 1940. So, I mean, their formative years did not have a keyboarder in front of them. So
right,
the
yeah,
trying to make sure that they do what they do best, and not handcuff them by being in front of a computer. It was
hmm
definitely a balance. So there was a lot more of a central person, not central person, but like a point person on each crew that kind of handled the bulk of the computer work, as opposed to having everybody doing their own. Just because you usually had at least one guy that was a little bit more savvy, as opposed to trying to put the guy that had been doing this job for 50 years is not going to change, what he was doing. Um, so
right.
yeah, there was a little bit of that keyboard fear in some of the veteran guys.
Yes, it's not quite so great anymore, but it's still, you know, operations people want to do hands-on stuff. That's
Yeah,
still the case today. Yeah, absolutely.
even with today, with people being more savvy on there, the software implementation, especially when you're talking about CMMS, really have to be geared towards the people that are doing the work. Um, you know, and again, I think that's something that the bigger ERPs sometimes lose track of. The Microsofts, the Oracles, they started as a software designed for people that are doing a desk job and evolved into a software that's supporting the manufacturing environment. When you're doing a rollout, though, you really need to start from that fundamental person, the guy that's touching the equipment. So if I can take 4 clicks away from a guy that's touching the equipment and add 10 minutes, that requires adding 10 minutes to somebody behind a desk, if that's the compromise you have to make, you're always better off streamlining it for the guy that's closest to the equipment, because they're the guys that are going to want it. That the software is not their primary goal. Their primary goal is to get the equipment up and running, and the software is a tool to make sure that they're doing it efficiently, to make sure we're capturing the data, to make sure that the people that are behind a keyboard more often have the data that they need to make good decisions to help prevent those issues from coming back.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, Mike. I'm reading through your certifications here, and there's just so many letters I don't know what to do with. So you are a Sigma Black Belt, Six Sigma Black Belt, CMRP, MLT1, and you have just tons of experience with D365 asset management. So tell us a little bit about how being exposed to that kind of methodologies and maintenance theory, how that's affected your approach when you're doing implementations and consulting with customers.
Oh, sure. So there's standards out there for pretty much everything. If you look hard
Yeah.
enough, you'll find it. So the SMRP, that is the Society of Maintenance Reliability Professionals that does the certification in there. They have a really good body of knowledge around what type of work is best practice across industry, like as far as percentage of preventative versus corrective, how to do
hmm
scheduling. They they don't go into a lot of specific training on this is how this guy does this job or this guy does this job. They really build it around standards to say,
hmm
a best in practice company is going to have this percentage of PMs versus this percentage of correctives versus capital improvements, talking about the life cycles of the equipment, the cost that you should expect to see. So it's all guidelines because things change. But as you get into some of those standards, whether it be SMRP, mining has some other ones depending on what industry you're going to. If you can figure out what those end best practices are, more around like what the either the industry standard or what the world-class standard would be. That's kind of the end. So if you can start with the end in mind and understand what you need to measure, what you need to look at as your stepping stones, that helps to define some of the configurations that you put into the software. So to translate some of that into CMMS terminology, when you're talking about your work order types or your job types, things like that, when you're designing it, it should be designed around, number one, how you do your business. So defining what your process is, but then also understanding what you need to measure so that you know what good looks like. There's no sense of doing all the data if that data doesn't influence your future decisions. Data for the sake of data is not helpful. Data that you can use to see if you're getting better, to see if you're doing things well, to see a trend that maybe is going sideways. So if you're in a flat line or whatever your graph is, when you see it take a sudden jump, something changed. So setting up your CMMS so that you can see those KPIs and using those industry standards, whether it be some of the Six Sigma trending and control charts or the SMRP guidelines and best practices. So getting all those things combined so that you can get the right data in, that you can see the KPIs that you want, and you can see when you're doing better or worse.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's a great point. One of the things that I find interesting is often it's easier to at least set goals and figure out what the best practice in the industry is, and maybe you can benchmark off of some other companies that are in your industry. Actually, usually we're coming in to help customers who are in a mess. They don't have a great CMMS system or EAM system. And I have trouble figuring out with customers what the baseline is. What's your percentage of PMs today so we can measure it and improve it? Well, they don't know, and they don't know how to figure it out. And so I think one of the hardest steps is benchmarking where you are now so you can measure improvement. Because a year from now, you want to say, well, have we improved on, our PM completion percentage? And well, we know what we are now, but we don't know what we were a year ago. So that can be a challenge.
Yeah, and a lot of that comes from that initial launch. So when they, people come in and they say, all right, well, what do you want to put as your work order types? And they say, well, I don't know. And it's like, well, the integrator's like, well, you have whatever choices you want. So someone that really hasn't done it before, hasn't seen it, is like, well, I'll guess at these different things. I do some stuff that is with a meter. So I'm going to say I have an electrical, and then another one that's, preventative. And I've seen some weird ones out there that people choose. So I've seen an anytime PM, as a work order type. So it's like people are with the best of intentions, they're trying to map things out. And then to your point, a year later, they're like, well, that definition doesn't help me measure anything. I can't tell, what my preventative versus corrective. I can't tell if my breakdowns are getting higher because they didn't define those categories in a way that's trendable over time.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, if you don't mind, I don't want you to use specific names on this particular show, but can you tell us a customer story where this has kind of impacted them, where you coming in and helping them kind of understand that? Please don't use company names, but where have you seen this really impact someone?
Well, I can talk from again, I'll talk to my experience on the implementation side. I worked for a company where we had numerous sites. There was an evolution of the company. So when you're talking about some of these sites were built by the company, other sites were started by some other company, and then ours purchased them, started by some other company, and then ours purchased them. So you had variety in equipment, you had variety of different mindsets going in, cultures, things like that.
Naming conventions too can be really difficult.
Naming conventions, inventory conventions, rules for. I mean, it's all over the place. A company, as they grow, small companies will typically handle each of their different sites as their own standalone company. You guys do good, you keep making money, and everybody will leave you alone. You get to a point in your growth where that approach doesn't work. So you'll get to the point where you're a medium-sized, large-sized company where everybody for themselves, you can't leverage best practice. You can't leverage, purchasing power. You can't leverage best, earnings design. So there is a point where they figured out that they got to standardize. We need common practices. We need common metrics across that. So being able to start with some of those standards, and using the SMRP or what other industry standards are out there, you almost need that backing from a bigger name so that you can not just implement a new process, but get people to buy in. You're not going to come to a company that's been doing well for 20 years and say, all right, what you're doing is wrong. We're going to do it a different way. That's just not going to be effective. But what you can do is say, look, you're doing these things very well. You can measure it even better and react even better if you adopt some of these industry standards. Roll in a few success stories along the way as you're rolling into those companies to show how they were able to have things jump out. And it's like, holy cow, I didn't realize that I had 20% of my work every week was unplanned break-in stuff. When you start looking at numbers like that and then you trend that over time to say, I'm down to 5% surprises. I mean, that's a big success story that you can then use to sell. The other big advantage to standardizing, especially if you can get into very strong KPIs. So we got a lot of Power BI type reports to get some really clean reporting and very deliberately compare site to site with those reports.
Right.
You wind up getting into some friendly competition in there as well. So now you get into your annual meetings and you start saying, well, this one site that takes pride in being like the show pony of the whole industry is now getting challenged by this site that was challenged, wasn't getting the numbers 2 years ago. They tend to kind of step it up just again from that friendly competition. So when you start looking at KPIs that are meaningful, that really indicate how the company's going to do, and you start, getting two sites that are kind of battling out for that best percentage, best ratio, you get that investment of it. You know what I mean? Like they kind of identify with, hey, this is who we are. We are the best at this. And then when the numbers show it, that's kind of the prize at the end of the race.
Yeah, exactly. With an engineering background, you can't improve it if you can't measure it. And obviously that's
right.
exactly what you're talking about. They measure it, but it has to be visible too. Measurement, and then like the KPIs that you're talking about, being able to really hang on to that and try to improve it day to day. All right, let's switch gears a little bit. What do you see as kind of the trends in maintenance and reliability, maybe over the last year, but into the next year? What do you think? How is, technology moves so fast, industry moves so fast? What's coming at us?
I think what you see coming is already something that's been on its way for a while. So definitely the handhelds, like the iPhones, have revolutionized everything. So how people just live their daily lives, that you don't know if it's going to rain tomorrow unless you have the phone in your hand. So the maintenance is definitely going that same way. So those mobile type applications, whether it be the Dynaway application or the Microsoft or some of the other ones that are out there, the evolution of what people can have as information in their hand and usable in their hand. When it was 5, 6, 7 years ago, they were out there, but they were still clunky. It wasn't really designed with the technician in mind. Going back to our initial part of the conversation.
Right.
These guys, you got big guys with some big hands trying to work these tiny little buttons. Some of the early ones with the BlackBerry type of keyboard, with that hard keyboard on there, guys just couldn't use that. Some of these young college kids with all these the little fingers could zip away at these keyboards, but these bigger burly guys with these big hands it just wasn't working. So the speech to text, the touch keyboards, the dedicated screens with larger buttons to say, I want to add hours, I want to add parts, and just, that weren't locked into the tiny little interfaces. So that evolution continues. I think what you see now, the big buzzword now is around AI. I do think that AI is going to make a big impact. But what I've also seen in some of the industries that have tried to capitalize on that is it's kind of data in versus data out. So if you don't have all the data in for the AI to make a decision, it doesn't really help you from a practical standpoint. So
Right.
I do think that while some of these trends, like the handhelds, transitioning over from dedicated handheld to like someone's phone or cellular typers, I think that trend is really maturing and is really useful, like really quickly. I think some of the AI trends are not quite there yet because while the speech recognition and taking that speech into, converting that into something is very strong. A lot of people will tell you that it will do everything. Well, it'll do everything as long as the data is there, but you can't have a device on every single piece, every single bearing in your manufacturing line, every motor, every fuse. So I think the AI, while there are some aspects of it that are going to be very effective very quickly, I think there's some people are trying to oversell it right now. So I would definitely
Okay.
caution people about trying to jump too far on that because there's only so much you can automate, so much you can measure in most manufacturing organizations.
Yeah, I agree. In my experience, capturing data and then having that data be clean and usable and not junk data is a challenge for a lot of maintenance and reliability organizations. So I agree with
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
totally.
And there's a point of diminishing returns. So I worked at a automated pharmacy where we had an uptime of, by the time I left there, we were over 96%, 96,
Hmm.
97% uptime. And that's actually measuring OEE. So it was really high. But we were a very high volume, very low profit margin per unit, but we were doing 1.1 million prescriptions a week. So it
Wow.
was that high volume really paid for a lot of automation. Whereas you get into some bigger, heavy industry, you start putting that money into a lot of the automation and metrics and all that, and the trying to get in that pharmacy, trying to get from a 96% to a 98% efficiency, it didn't pay for it. There was a diminishing return. So the amount of money you would have to put into it
Right.
to get that 2% didn't make sense in a
Yeah.
business plan. And I think you see that breaking point at different places for different companies. So yeah, you've got to weigh out the benefits versus the costs, like any other business.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. Last question, Mike, before we kind of transition. Any other trends besides AI or anything coming at operations teams out there today that you think will make an impact in the next 5 years? What else should we be thinking about?
But we talked a little bit about the handhelds. I mean, I think the
Hmm.
that type of interface, whether it be web-based or app-based, I think that's a huge one because I think you have that
Right.
generation coming around that's how they think. So
Yeah.
I do think that's going to be a huge one.
Yeah. So maybe the way to capture data, then that's a method of capture
Yeah, the
potentially.
vector
Yeah.
capture data and the user interface, I think is,
Hmm.
the speech to text has already been out there. I think that's where you're going to see some of the AI really coming into play. So I do see a trend towards that. So not so much AI as, we can tell you what everything is doing in your plant based on sensors and devices, but having the technician be able to say, I just found something on this route. I need to create a work order to do this and have that
Right.
converted into, taking those actions based on that. That's where I think
Yeah.
the AI stuff you're going to see some transitions pretty soon.
Yeah. I got a funny story on that. Like we were wondering how well the text to speak functionality worked, and I have a colleague. He was doing an implementation in the UK, and they brought in one of the guys from the shop floor who's Scottish, and he has one of the thickest Scottish William Wallace accents you've ever heard. And they were like, talk into this and see if it can pick up, and it did a remarkably good job. So it's already gotten pretty good in that area.
It has. So that last rollout that I talked about with the multiple sites was from Virginia down to Florida, and that was one of the jokes when I would teach the classes that it does speak Southern, so you'll be good.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. All right, so let's talk about the upcoming conference, Dynaway Connect. You're a speaker. We're so glad that you're going to be at the conference and helping us learn a little bit more about the product and how we can use it better. Can you give us kind of a hint or some bullet points that you're going to be talking about? What's your session going to concern?
Yeah. So the session is very much highlighting that same implementation that we talked about with a multi-site implementation, really from the perspective of the maintenance manager. So um, there's a lot of how-to that will go into with some other groups that'll talk about the capabilities of the software and what it can do and things like that, which is great, very valuable. Highly recommend going to see all that stuff. If you are a maintenance manager that's getting into a new CMMS or trying to understand what the priority should be or understand what some of the roadblocks and hurdles that you would see along the way, like I'm trying to gear this session around that perspective. So what is it that you need to make sure you do up front? What are the things you should consider, whether it be the KPIs, whether it be your work order types, all the way down to what the ownership is, both within your group and at management to make this a successful launch. So we went through a 2-year evolution. First year was just getting everybody standardized on the same processes. And then a year later, getting everybody upgraded onto D365. We were using the old AX 2012 version prior.
Right.
Just trying to summarize all those different roadblocks and hurdles and things that we learned along the way, and hopefully lay that out to the next guy that is doing this from scratch so that they can have this all mapped out ahead of time.
That's awesome. It sounds like an exciting session. I can't wait to listen. Last question, and then we'll let you go, Mike. Just for those that are listening on this podcast, what's your kind of opinion and feeling on the effectiveness and usefulness of these types of conferences, a learning conference on a particular subject matter area? Over the years, has it impacted your career at all? Have you had customers that have found them useful, or are they a great place to meet people and learn a little something, but they haven't really impacted the organization?
They've been tremendous for me. I find that those surprise teachable moments occur more face to face as opposed to in some of the organized, especially online teachings and trainings. So being able to get in there and having those agendas to go through is great, because there's definitely topics that you'll find that is relevant to whatever your project is, whatever your learning curve is, company maturity, all that kind of stuff. But what I find most beneficial is some of those unexpected conversations that come about because of that. So getting into those last questions, hey, the instructor mentioned something that prompted a question about a problem that I'm having now, and hearing somebody else in the audience's take on that same type of issue, like those impromptu little collaborations is where I've really found the most value, and those are the ones where I've made the most notes, taking down, business cards, just like people that just are dealing with similar issues, and being able to share, they have solved a different problem in a different way than I had ever thought about doing it. And then vice versa. So that by far has been the most value add for me, whether it be at these conferences or going to a vendor or going to a manufacturer, suppliers, things like that. So I don't think there's a substitute for that. And when you can get in, like this conference was so much of a diversified group, to get like that many people, and they're obviously going there because they're interested and already on this journey somewhere. So it's just a great opportunity to really get those unofficial learnings as much as the official agendas.
Wonderful. We can't wait to hear your session and see you at the conference. So that wraps it up for Dynaway Dialogues this week. I really appreciate Mike joining. Please remember to like or subscribe or whatever platform you're watching this on. tag us up and help us with the subscription base. I just appreciate everyone's support, and we will see you next time on Dynaway Dialogues. Have a great
All right.
afternoon.
Thank you.